You're listening to the RN Mentor, a podcast designed to document and bring you the work and experience of some of the most influential nurses in our profession. We will be sitting down and having a discussion with the leaders of today's nursing world as they share their work, how they navigate their nursing path, and their views on the future of the profession. My name is Ali Tayeb. I am a registered nurse, United States Navy veteran, a Jonas Veterans Healthcare Scholar, and your host for the RN Mentor. Hello and welcome to another episode of the RN Mentor podcast. Very excited to be joined today by Dr. Dan Weberg. Dr. Weberg is a fellow of the American Academy of Nursing, as well as an expert in nursing, healthcare innovation, and complex systems leadership. He has extensive clinical experience in emergency department, acute inpatient hospital settings, and academia. Dr. Weberg supports Kaiser Permanente as an executive director of nursing workforce development and innovation, supporting nursing workforce planning, a systems level new grad residency program, and other system level nursing education initiatives. He has also held leadership roles at KP in nursing innovation, research and technology strategy across 8 regions, 38 hospitals, and 68,000 nurses. He was also part of the founding faculty for the Kaiser Permanente School of Medicine. He served as vice president for transformation services at Ascension, supporting 60,000 nurses and 140 plus facilities in modernizing nursing technology, developing new care models, and measuring innovation outcomes. Dr. Weberg is on the faculty at the Ohio State University College of Nursing and multiple innovation fellowship programs. He is on the editorial board for Nursing Administration Quarterly and has authored 24 peer-reviewed articles and 2 textbooks, including Evidence-Based Innovation Leadership for Health Professions and Leadership in Nursing Practice. Dr. Weberg earned his bachelor's in nursing and was in the first cohort to graduate from the Master's in Healthcare Innovation program and the first ever graduate of the PhD in Healthcare Innovation Leadership program at Arizona State University. Dr. Weberg serves on several boards, including as vice president of the American Nurses Association, California. Welcome to the show, Dr. Weberg.
Thanks, Ali. This is great, and I'm so excited to be here. And finally, we've been chatting offline so many times, and it's finally to be good to be officially on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you. And you're a podcast connoisseur or podcaster yourself, I should say. So that's not on your bio, but you have that history as well. So
yeah,
excited to have you on the show.
Yeah, we did about 6 seasons of it, and it was a great learning experience. So excited to contribute to the podcast nation.
I appreciate it. Thank you. So we'll get started right with my first question for all my guests is how did you get started in the world of nursing?
Yeah, that I sort of fell into it. I was a freshman at Arizona State University, and I was a business major as a freshman, and I took my economics class. I think it was macroeconomics, and I hated every second of it. And I went back after that class and said, I don't want to sit in a cubicle for the rest of my life. And actually during the spring break, while my friends were out partying in Mexico and other places, I stayed in the dorm for that week, and I went through all of the majors and just started thinking about like what really got me excited. And I sort of reflected back in high school. I really liked anatomy and physiology class, and so decided to actually go pre-med, and went down that track, and just was not a fan of the pre-med culture, of the sort of type A gunner, high achievement, like I'll take all these extra things to try and round out a resume, and just didn't like that. And one of the advisors said, well, not everyone gets into medical school. You should have a backup. And I was like, I don't know what my backup will be. I'll just choose nursing. And I had no idea. Like I literally had no idea. I started volunteering at some hospitals in the ER. I did some migrant health work with farmers in migrant farmers in Arizona, and really sort of found my calling with patients and with people, and started digging more into nursing, and ended up dropping the pre-med stuff and going full bore into nursing. Barely scraped in. I don't think I would even get into nursing school now with I had like a 3.5 GPA and there's an entrance exam to nursing schools. I aced that. That was probably the only way I got into nursing school, and fell into nursing school and just fell in love with it. And I think, I transformed a little bit. I was sort of that pre-med sort of mentality, I think, rubbed off on me. So my first year of nursing, or my first semester of nursing school, was really humbling, and I had some great mentors sort of gut check me, and then just fell in love with the profession, and here we are.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, you mentioned not being able to get into nursing school. Yeah, I don't think I would be in the same boat as you. I don't like my GPA would not be competitive at this point in my life, and it's kind of I want to almost say it's kind of sad to say that, because GPAs for me anyway, the way I see it, is not indicative of success in the nursing program or how well you do in the world of nursing.
Yeah.
Right. And I think it's sort of sad that the GPA plays such a huge role. Like, I get it, you have to pass certain courses. But, like, even like if you look at some of the programs where, for example, for myself, like, I'm sure I got extra points for being a veteran for the nursing program. And that may be how I got into the nursing program. But from my perspective, is when we look at these models of how we have students come into nursing programs. So from, like I said, like the veterans perspective, you have veterans who don't necessarily come in with the best GPAs, right? Like maybe on the low end of your entrance into the university or the school, but their success rates is still high, right? And actually, most of them, actually, if you look at veterans across the board, their success rates in completing higher education is higher than their civilian counterparts. So the fact that as a profession we harp so much on GPAs is kind of on how we allow people to enter into programs is kind of doesn't rub me the right way. So
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, one of the things that we were doing when we built the Kaiser Med School, we were actually looking at the data for MCAT pass rates. And there was some correlation in the research on MCAT pass rates and success as a physician. And there's some research on that. So we used that, but we tried to lower the bar as close to that passing number as possible.
Yeah.
And that was to open up the opportunity for people who have other talents other than standardized test taking
Exactly.
to bring to the profession. And I think, there's an aspect of nursing that needs that. I mean, I was talking with somebody recently, and, I said, nursing is just an interesting profession. And we were talking about why, and they had this hypothesis that nursing really represents the population at large. You have all of the same diversity that we have in the United States represented in the profession at all levels. And so it reflects those same challenges that we have in our society. And it's kind of an interesting thing, but we can only have that if we allow for that diverse non-academic story to come through as well.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we can definitely diversify more, just being both of us being male in the primarily female profession. We can definitely, and I don't know why. Well, actually, I do know why. But from a perspective of being in a profession, being a man in the profession, and looking at some of the barriers that I face, I've had actually people straight up tell me like men shouldn't be in the world of nursing, which is really interesting to hear from a profession that is compassionate and all of those other words that are thrown out there.
Yeah.
So it's interesting when you run into those very specific things, and I do agree with you on, but diversity of what people bring into the profession. I think nursing is probably one of the most diverse, because people do come from all sorts of background and experiences. And one of the reasons I love working with accelerated programs or the master's entry level programs, because those students have like a lived life, right?
Mhm.
And they're bringing other skill sets into the profession. And I always appreciate that. And I always tell them, don't leave that stuff behind, regardless of what you hear.
Yeah.
Don't leave that stuff behind. Bring that stuff with you, because we're that much as a profession, we're that much better for it.
Yeah.
Um,
Agreed
so
there.
I definitely agree on that. So what made you decide you were going to go on once you got into the School of Nursing? Go on, and what did you do next?
Yeah. Well, I graduated and I got into the ER. So my first job as a new grad was a new grad in the emergency department at UCLA, at the main campus. Before the nice Ronald Reagan Hospital, we were in the basement down there, in the old hospital. We used to
Yep.
count the cockroaches.
Oh my
But
God.
in nursing school, I had gotten into programming the simulator. So we had Sim Man. He was in a box. It was my senior project to sort of pull him out and figure out how to run a scenario with him. And we created Coder Johnson as the scenario. And it was a ACLS scenario. And I just really loved the simulation world and how we could replicate these scenarios that I didn't get to see in clinicals. And so, sort of it started as a new grad, but was always sort of dabbling in the sim stuff. I ended up doing like a consulting contract with Mount St. Mary's College. And then ultimately ASU made an offer for me to come back and work for them part-time as a simulation technology nurse. And I was doing that part-time. I was working full-time nights in the emergency department in Scottsdale, and that sort of got me into the academic world. And when I was building the Sim Center, they had just started the Masters in Healthcare Innovation program at Arizona State, and I had no idea what that really meant, and just really decided I was going to build a simulator, and I needed innovation to do that. And so I joined this program. I remember having this call with Kathy Malik, Dr. Kathy Malik, about the program, and I got in, and I was in the first cohort for this master's program that had never existed. And it was just really interesting. It was all about leadership, and we had Tim Porter Grady stand in the front of the room on the day one of this whole
Ah,
program. I had no
nice.
idea who this guy is. Like, I'm just an ER, new grad ER nurse. Like, I'm just clueless to the world. And he stood up there and we called it the Sunday sermon. He just blew my mind with his one of his keynotes about
Wow.
leadership and shared
Yeah.
governance and the future of the profession. I was like, this is where I need to be. I really started resonating with that leadership stuff. Sort of dropped off the idea of simulation, building a simulator, and really started embracing this idea of how do you lead change in healthcare, and fell in love with that. And went through that program. It was awesome. And then at the end of the program, they're like, hey, we have this PhD, and people should apply. And I was like, oh, sure, I'll apply, whatever.
Hooked you right in. Hooked you right
Yeah, I
in.
just like I threw my thing in, and I was the only one that got in that semester into the innovation track of the PhD. And so I got one-on-one mentorship with Tim Porter Grady and Kathy Malik, which is, life changing for me. And it was just sort of saying yes to the opportunity, and something that felt like I was interested in it, and ended up graduating with that degree as well, with some really great mentorship. So I really never had a plan to get a doctorate, to do the leadership stuff. I thought I was just going to be an ER nurse for a while, and really enjoyed the clinical practice, but found a calling in the innovation and change work, and it's worked out so far pretty well.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And for our listeners, if you don't know who Dr. Tim Porter Grady is, I'll look back a few seasons. He was actually on the podcast maybe a couple of years ago, maybe a year ago or so. Amazing. And it's actually one of the most downloaded podcasts on the RN Mentor podcast. So I appreciated his insight. Really amazing individual.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about you're big in the leadership world. You're big in the innovation world. Just given your background. Let's talk about nursing innovation for a second. Just because I think you and I have talked several times, and I think we see eye to eye on this. But what is your like maybe 30,000 view of nursing innovation? Like, where are we as a profession? And then maybe we can get into like, where do we need to go from here, type of a thing.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're at the sort of this paradigm shifting moment as a profession, coming out of COVID and the workforce issues, the burnout, the sort of questioning the past ways of work that nursing's done. And so I think it's really the chance for nursing to build its own future. I'm excited about sort of the groundswell of innovation efforts that are happening. We have the ANA now supporting formal innovation. We have other groups that are creating the space for nurses to build devices and ideas and funding and all this stuff that just it wasn't there 10 years ago. And so it's really great to see that happen. So I think we're at this precipice where nurses can really choose to take control of their careers and control of healthcare and build solutions that the system has needed for a very long time. I do think our profession also is on a paradox with the past. And I continue to hear how we need to go back to pre-COVID, or what would Florence Nightingale do? And that, for me, that's sort of triggering, because why are we looking at 1805 as the path forward in 2023? And
Right.
so I know there's great things. We need to honor the past. And I think, throughout my career, I've sort of balanced that. It's how do you honor the past, but boldly push into the future? And I think we need to really do that and let go, disenthrall ourselves with some of those things that happened in the Crimean War, and actually look towards a different future, or a new emergence of the profession. So I think we're right at that time where innovation is going to catalyze our profession moving forward, and there's resources to do that now. And now it's about nurses making the choice to jump wholeheartedly into that disruptive change.
Yeah, I agree with you. And there's no love. Anybody that's heard me talk before, there's no love lost between myself and Florence Nightingale. Um,
That's something we can
just
agree on.
yeah, the whole concept again, being a starting right off the bat, being a male individual
Mhm.
in the world of nursing, that within itself doesn't I can't associate myself with
Mhm.
her. But you're right. But like with her, with individuals like Mary Seacole, the things that we can actually take away is how can we be bold and initiate change,
Mhm.
right? And I think that's what a lot of are the individuals that really started the formal profession of nursing, because nursing has been around for probably thousands of years.
Yep.
But the what we call the profession of nursing now has been led by individuals who had a different vision and actually ran with it. And I think that's what we could take away for 2023 going into 2024. I think those are the lessons we need to take away, not like how can we go back to the 1800s,
Yeah.
which
Agreed.
is not the way we need to be moving
No,
forward.
no, we need to go the other direction.
Yes. So yeah, so thank you for that. um but looking at for individuals that are listening, what does nursing innovation mean? Because so many people put nursing innovation in the box of technology,
Mhm.
or they put it in the box of like electronic health records, which really kind of triggers me whenever they say, when we talk innovations, then they go straight for the EHR, and I'm like, that's not innovation. That's just a
No.
different way of documentation. What does innovation in the world of nursing mean, other than creating, like, let's say, new equipment and things like that?
Yeah. I mean, at the heart of sort of the literature of innovation, it's really about creating novel solutions in a population that needs that change, or hasn't experienced it again. So, if you go all the way back to like Everett Rogers, or even Schumpeter's work in the like the early 1900s Industrial Revolution sort of era, it really was about solving problems differently and creating products that haven't been experienced before. And that, and there's an example there too, because people think, well, innovation has to be this new thing. No one's ever seen it in the whole world. And that's not necessarily true either.
Right.
If you went to in the Industrial Revolution, if you went to a country that didn't have a train and you created a train, a locomotive, that's an innovation to that population, because they've never had that solution before. And so it's really those novel solutions. So if you think about it in the context of an organization, it's creating novel solutions to unpredictable problems, or sort of unwieldy problems within a system. And that can be
Yeah.
technology, that can be process, that can be marketing and how you brand things and how people perceive. Those are all sort of types of innovation that occur within systems. So it's definitely not just technology. And when we teach students that, they're like, "Oh, I'm going to build an app." Everyone wants to build an app to solve every problem. It's like, you're never going to build it. You're not going to build an app. Stop thinking about an app. Think about this. What's the process change? And you can enable it with a technology, but the actual innovation is the complete redesign of a service
Right.
or an experience and those type of things. That's really what innovation is. It's something new that adds value both economically and socially to a population.
Yeah. And I appreciate you mentioning that, because you mentioned apps, and so many people are like, oh, I'm going to build an app. So I'm like, that's fantastic. Go for it. But again, it's not this. It's a platform, right? The
Right.
apps are the platforms, and I think probably the iPhones and of the world and the are kind of hearing that, because every time you need something, there's a new app for it, right? So
Mm-hmm.
everybody thinks that's innovation. But you mentioned something um, around nurses being involved in this process, and I want to say, and education, uh, because from if you look at traditional education, whether it's an ADN program or a BSM program, you hardly see innovation introduced in those programs at all, because we're so NCLEX focused, right? Where do you see as the best area, perhaps, where, or how can faculty introduce innovation or innovational concepts to students in the pre-licensure? Because I think that's where I think we have the most to gain, because people are early on just starting to frame their mindset around what nursing is about. And I think that's the best place to start introducing concepts like innovation into them, because it becomes part of their nursing framework. So uh, having the experience of teaching innovation and working with students, maybe I should ask, where do you introduce it, or where do you think it can be introduced in a pre-licensure program?
Yeah, that's a tough one, because we've set up the culture in undergrad to be so NCLEX focused, and
Mm,
so and I haven't taken a look at the actual test categories for the next gen NCLEX, but
no,
innovation's not usually in there. And
no,
so it's hard to get the students' attention. And the same thing happens with with leadership class and evidence-based practice class. It's sort of
right.
like, well, if it's not on the test, I'm going to sort of deprioritize it and focus on my peds, like vital sign memorization sort of stuff. So
Right.
I think, we have to sort of look at that as just a culture, and figure out how we sort of reprioritize and put some of these other big buckets of the profession into the test. But I think what that means is, you, as a faculty member, you have to relate it back to the so what for the undergraduate students. And I find, evidence-based practice is probably the best application of how to lead innovation, or to put those innovation nuggets in there, because it's the process you should be following for innovation in general. You should be doing a clear problem statement. You should be appraising the evidence to know what's already been done, and then the innovation aspect is jumping off of that if the answer is not clear, to try out new things
Mm,
based on that evidence, and then that can be the innovation. So I think that's one aspect of, like, how do you bring new practice ready solutions or interventions into your practice. I think the second piece is, we have to open up, and med school started to really do this now across the country, but we have to start opening up the options beyond bedside care as your next step in your career. And that could be, going into medical device companies and helping create things. It could be working in research and doing interventions with clinical trials. Like, there's all these coaching, all these other things that you can do as a nurse that I think can open people's minds up, and then taps into that sort of entrepreneurial innovation spirit for those that are interested in that, to do something beyond direct care as they enter the profession. So I think those are sort of the two ways we can get undergrad students involved and interested in it, because it's relevant to what they may want for their life, or it's relevant to things that they're going to have to do when they go into practice. I think if we just go off and say, well, you should learn complex systems leadership and all this kind of thing, I think it sort of turns off because they don't have the context to apply it right away.
Yeah.
But when we get to the master's and doctorate level, they have that world experience, and now they want to know how to lead better, and then they can absorb it in that framework a little bit better.
Yeah, I agree. But again, so you mentioned some concepts that I think are fantastic as far as putting it perhaps somewhere in like the evidence-based practice or a research course for the pre-licensure. Do the faculty in general have the know-how of incorporating something like innovation or innovation concepts into the curriculum, or where do we need to develop our faculty to be able to incorporate that?
Yeah, I mean, I think no. I mean, generally speaking, I don't think innovation is usually part of the conversation, especially in the undergrad curriculum. But I think there's an opportunity for us to really think about it, and so I do think we need to have more. And I don't think you have to go like hardcore, innovation, research, literature, that kind of stuff. I think we just need to get better at introducing the aspects of change and leading change into all levels of nursing curriculum. And that's as simple as talking about change frameworks and change theories and how that relates to, how you're going to adapt to a changing patient situation, how you're going to convince or negotiate with a patient for different care interventions or different evidence-based practice things or treatments, et cetera. All the way up through how do you, lead change in your team and do that as a professional as well. So I think if we just started with just change as like a foundational concept that we teach, it helps them from the individual team and system level, and we can apply it throughout. So I think that's really where we miss the boat on the faculty side. And then, but even at ASU, when I was going through the program, we had faculty members in the PhD program that didn't believe innovation was a science and that leadership wasn't a science. And so, I think we have to sort of overcome some of those things and go back to that. The innovation literature is not necessarily in nursing literature, it's in business literature. And we have to look outside our profession for this evidence that and open our minds up that other people had really good ideas besides nurses. And so we can learn from them. And so let's learn from them, like Rogers and Schumpeter and all these other, Stacy, all these other authors in the business world that really created the foundations for understanding how organizations and people create novel solutions. If we just start there with some of those stories, I think we can really get excitement and have the foundations for nursing students to build upon as they enter practice.
Yeah, and you make a great point, and it's a point of frustration for me. A lot is the fact that nursing looks at nursing and doesn't look beyond nursing, and I think that's just it doesn't make sense to me because there's so much other concepts and studies and research and everything out there that we can easily adapt for the work that we do because we are everywhere, right? It's not just acute care, direct patient care, and I think that's one of the things that's maybe paralyzing us at times is because we can't see beyond the bedside, and that's a shortfall of the profession where people like individuals like yourself who are looking beyond the four walls of a hospital when you're teaching or you're speaking or you're doing any kind of work, you're looking beyond the four walls of the hospital, and it's appreciated. So thank you.
Yeah. When I see our physician colleagues as well, like they don't, in my experience, and this is generalization, but they'll step up when they want something changed, and they'll be loud, and they'll go to the meeting, and they'll bring evidence, and they'll sometimes push their way to get what they need. And what I find generally in nursing is we definitely have people that do that, but for the most part, nursing's like, oh, they won't give it to me, I'm going to go on social media now and complain about it instead of like trying to push it forward. And I know that's like a very big generalization, but yeah. I do see sort of a different mentality. When we get frustrated or we hit a roadblock, we sort of shut down and go insular and try and corroborate it with our colleague, our nurse colleagues, instead of stepping up, stepping out, and maybe demanding something in a way that we other professions or our other colleagues are doing. So I hope we can overcome some of that victim mentality that's sort of in nursing
Yeah.
as a generalization.
And you bring up you're making a lot of light bulbs go off in my head right now. How much do you think that victim mentality is self-inflicted from a nursing profession? Like we have stepped up and been shut down. I can tell you like very recent experience for myself, where I brought up a concept and there was retaliation for me even mentioning something like that. So from that perspective, how much of that is like self-inflicted wounds in the profession of nursing where we've learned just, you know what, I'm just going to walk away and complain about it.
Yeah, I think there is a definitely self-inflicted piece to it. I think that's that struggle between what we think nursing should be and what's happening, and some attachment to the stories and the history of that, and so I do think there's definitely internal issues there. And I think there's real lived experiences where it's happened. I mean, the culture up until recently also was this big hierarchy in organizations where nurses were sort of the bottom of of the barrel for the most part, and the physician, you'd have to stand up for the physician to sit down to chart, and
Right.
that's in recent history. That wasn't all that far ago. So I think there's some overcoming of these cultural norms, and our organizations aren't always set up to support people that step up and be loud like that. And then we have bullies, we have toxic people in the profession and in organizations that sort of perpetuate this culture.
Mm.
So yeah, I think we need, the thing that nursing can stop bullying other nurses. I mean, that's easy.
Very
We don't
true.
have to ask permission. We just have to stop it and hold
Stop.
people accountable. Like, let's just do that, and the world's a better place.
I know, like it's mind-boggling for like I haven't, I compared to some of my colleagues, I have not been a nurse that long. I became a nurse in 2007, so it's like like 16 years now.
Mhm.
I need to probably stop saying I haven't been a nurse that long. But then when I have my colleagues who've been nurses in like 30 years or 35 years, I'm like, okay, well, I haven't been a nurse that long.
Mhm.
Um, but I just completely lost train of my thought. No, but what I'm trying to get to is I think from the time that I've come into the world of nursing, I've heard about this nurse bullying. There's been literature around nurse bullying. There's been research around nurse bullying, and we're still talking about nurse bullying. And that's at least 16 years that I
Yeah.
can, that I can say this has been happening, and I'm sure, and the literature goes even further back. So it's
Yeah.
really weird that we continue to perpetuate the whole idea
I
of
mean, that's the thing that gets me is like, we've been talking about the same thing for 30 years.
yeah,
Like, nursing just continues to, I mean, even at the academy at the 50-year keynote, I was like, this is stuff that was talked about 10 years ago.
yeah,
Like, this is supposed to be the future. And I think those are the things that frustrate me, is like, can we just move to the future? Can we just
yeah.
talk about what is possible? Can we open up our brains to think beyond a New York Times article that was written? Like where's our narrative in this thing? And anyway, so I do think we need to break away. And that, I think there's this great quote by Abraham Lincoln. He talks about disenthralling ourselves, and then we shall save our future, our country. And I
Yeah.
think nursing needs to disenthrall itself with a few things and people, and we can actually, make the profession that I think we all aspire to make.
Yeah, I agree. Um, so I want to use some of our time because you do have a large footprint in the world of leadership, uh, with your writings and your national and I'm going to assume international speaking engagements on leadership. Um, where is nursing leadership? I mean, this is a sort of a loaded question. Where do you think nursing leadership is right now when it comes to leading, as you mentioned, leading nursing into the future, right? Like, where are we as a profession, and where do you think we need to go?
Yeah, I think there are some there's there's leaders that are emerging that have a view of the future, and I'm excited about it. I think there's sort of a changing of the guard that's happening, a generational shift in who's emerging as our new sort of executive leadership. I think we're seeing a lot of people come up in those informal leadership roles as well, either whether it's on social media or within organizations without the title. They're doing some really interesting things. And I think there's sort of the groundswell of we need this innovation stuff. I mean, just when I go out and speak, to these different organizations, people really resonate with this building the future innovation stuff. So I think that the time is now. And again, another nursing paradox is we also have leaders that are perpetuating the old system and benefit from that. And so I think we're seeing the shift more towards, like, we're not going to put up with that. We see that with the labor movements. We see that with nurses, ready to leave an organization at the drop of a hat to go do something different, and feeling agency and making those career choices, where before you had to pay your dues for 10 years before you could ever do that. Now you can do that in a year or 6 months in some cases. So I think that agency is really helping push against some of those old structures that aren't so good, and help, and they gravitate towards the ones that are better. So I think we're ready for it. What I'd like to see, though, is our national organizations take a bolder stance on creating that future, and being more vocal with social media specifically, but also just in general around creating a narrative that's different than some of the things that I see on TikTok and Instagram. And there's this sort of divide of us versus them, staff nurse versus management, and just this whole sort of narrative that's perpetuated with a few voices, and there's not a counter to it. So I would like to see more nurse leaders jump in to talk about the changes they're leading, the system that's broken, the things that are holding us back, and where we need novel solutions. And that's what I think is really missing in the innovation narrative is the other side of the story. What is quote unquote this ambiguous management group doing, and just being out and clear and more transparent in the great work that people are building in their system. So I think that's sort of the general landscape at this point.
Yeah, and I appreciate that answer, because you're right, because I think most nursing organizations are sort of absent in countering some of the other concepts that are out there about the world of nursing, because they're going business as usual, and they're just not shifting to counter some of the perhaps the negative or ideas or concepts that are out there. So it is sometimes disheartening when larger organizations that represent all of us are absent in that arena.
Yeah.
And you mentioned something else, the concept of the old guard, because I see it all the time, where you have nurses with a lot of years of experience, right, that are failing to build the next generation, right? And they're just moving, and you see them in leadership positions like everywhere, right? They have they sit on every board, and they sit on like 8 different boards, and every time you turn around, you see their face. I'm like, how are you, for example, like the CNO of this large institution or this large body, and also sit on 8 boards, and while other individuals are struggling to find their way into these leadership roles, right? Is it necessary for you to be in all of these, or I had somebody on the show a few months ago, and she said it beautifully, as far as they're playing musical chairs, and she was very specific. And I don't want to burn any bridges, but she was speaking about deans, and we see deans move from one university to another university to another university. I'm like, and then like, where is the opportunity that we are creating for other individuals to step into those dean roles.
Yeah.
And I say it in service side too, where people are going from one organization to another organization. Where are we? And this is actually one of the reasons I created the RN Mentor podcast, is because I was like, where is the everyday nurse hearing about the work that nurses are doing outside of the four walls of the hospital, or if they're not attending a conference, which by the way, I need to say this as much as possible. The pricing on conferences is getting a little bit out of hand,
Yep.
and is becoming less and less affordable. So that within itself is creating some inequities within the nursing profession.
Mm-hmm.
But also, like, how do I bring uh somebody like yourself who's actually well known in the conference community, and I'm sure you've done your share of speaking engagements. Like, how do I bring your voice to the nurses that aren't at those conferences
Mm-hmm.
necessarily, right? So with that said, and again with the RMN's podcast, another reason I want to create it was because I was having a hard time finding a mentor,
Mm-hmm.
right? So which is something like when I was in the military, I had no issues. I knew exactly who I could talk to. They were very open to it, and they were happy to. It was part of the system, where I feel like nursing struggles with that. Um, what's your take on creating like the mentorship, the sponsorship, creating the next generations of leaders? Who's doing it well, and what do we need to do as a profession to do it better?
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a really good point, which is, I think there's an opportunity for people to, one of the pieces of leadership is stepping aside to let others take the reins, for
Right.
lack of a better analogy, is to step into those roles and to take a mentor, coach perspective rather than I need to sit there in a formal role and you need to be my subordinate until I'm done and then you'll be this thing. I think we really got to sort of fix that piece and allow people to step aside and put term limits. And I feel like it's like
Yeah.
we got to do all the things that like the U.S. government's got to figure out too, for our profession. But yeah, I do think, if I look at, complex systems, complexity theory, one of the pieces, one of the sort of foundation of that is organizations are living systems. And if you have the same sort of structures that allow a human body to thrive, then and you relate that to an organization, sort of food, lack of stress, time to repair, like those type of things. And one of those aspects is a living thing needs to reproduce. That's how that's how that species continues to be around. And I think we have to take that analogy to nursing and organizations. We have to, when we look at organizations and reproduction, is not necessarily creating more. It's creating succession, so that when one part of that system leaves, goes away, steps down, whatever, that there's an organic way for the next generation to step in there. And I don't think we always do a good job of that. We don't set up formal succession plans. We want people to be on these career tracks, especially in academia. If you don't check these boxes, you'll never get to tenure, et cetera.
Right.
And I've always found that really frustrating. I've never had a linear career path, and even when applying to the academy for a fellow, I had to craft a different story. Like I didn't have I started with a T1 grant, and then it went into an R3, and then it went to R1, and then it was NIH funded, and then boom, I'm the expert in all this stuff, which is a perfectly great pathway. For me, it was like, well, I was at this organization for 3 years and did some stuff, and I went over here and did some more stuff, and here's the other thing, I did this innovation work, and this is the impact. And it was hard to craft that because it wasn't that linear path I think we expect people to be on. And so I think there's an opportunity for us to embrace experiences outside of a linear path as a rich environment for us to pick our leaders from. Like, just because you weren't a manager on a med surg unit for 5 years doesn't mean you can't be a great leader in some aspect within a system. And so I think we have to sort of move away from those linear paths and embrace that breadth of experiences and how it relates to what we're trying to achieve in a role or in an organization.
Yeah. And I think one of the issues we have is we don't we don't ask like the people that necessarily like maybe work for us or work with us, like what their goals are, right? So we're not developing them in that way. We're just developing them in what we think they should be doing versus developing them in what they want to do. And I think that's a great point. And I agree with you on the academy thing. When my sponsors came to me and said, we want to sponsor you for the academy, I was like, no, I don't have, like 30 years of experience with like 50 publications and stuff like that. So yeah, it was very difficult trying to craft that, the messaging and your impact when it doesn't follow the traditional kind of way of doing things. So 100% agree. We're just about at time, and I want to make sure I don't run into your next meeting because I know you're a busy individual. What are your thoughts on next steps for that leadership? If you ran, let's say, if they gave you a day and they said you can do whatever you want with the world of nursing, what would that be? What would be like the one thing that you would tweak if you had the opportunity to do so?
Oh man. I would do so much. I think, just to keep it practical, I would say I would create an accountability framework for nurse leaders for their behaviors. And that would be rewarding nurse leaders who take risks and support their teams and build succession plan and have the future of the profession in mind. And it would be challenging those who are allowed to stick in the past and create the drama, the toxicity, the bullying, and let those cultures sort of
fester.
Yeah, fester, exactly. And I would create a way to identify it very quickly and remove the people that let it fester.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what I would change. I mean, the profession in general is amazing, and there's so much opportunity, and we have such an impact on people's lives. I wouldn't change the practice necessarily. I think where our issue is as a profession is in our structure and in our voice. And so I would, get rid of the bad eggs potentially, or help them sort of find joy elsewhere. And then I would elevate nursing's voice into a single voice, coordinated voice that could actually change policy and change practice and fight some of the fight the good fight to build a different health system.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I like how you worded that. Help them find joy elsewhere.
That's right.
I love that. I love that. That's I would like to assist in that process. So we're just about at time. Anything else you wanna share with the audience?
No, I'm just appreciate this, and I think if you're listening to this, you have such great content in this podcast. I think, what are you going to do about it? And just know that there's a group of co-conspirators out there that want to support you and are willing to challenge the status quo. And so, if you have an idea, you have a frustration that you want to solve, connect with people, get on LinkedIn, get in, find those mentors out there that will help you navigate the world and go make it awesome. Like, now is the time to build it. So just appreciate the time and the opportunity to chat today.
Thank you. We've been listening to Dr. Dan Weberg, and I look forward to bringing you more incredible guests in the future. Thank you. You've been listening to the RN Mentor with your host, Ali Tayeb. Please don't forget to visit www.alirtayeb.com. That's www.alirtayeb.com for podcast notes and resources. And don't forget to subscribe. Until next time, I wish you fair winds and following seas.